Hello, Tiny Desk viewers. I'm Jonathan Biss, coming to you from my home in Philadelphia. Sorry, I just had to fight off the overwhelming urge to make up a fake name. There's a game where you can invent your NPR name by inserting your middle initial somewhere into your first name, and then your last name is the most off the beaten path place you've ever traveled to. So, showing enormous restraint, I did not do that. I'm Jonathan Biss, and even though I really wish I were at the real NPR Tiny Desk, I'm still so happy that I get to play for you in this way. It's a real gift in these peculiar times. There's still the possibility of sharing music. And the music that I just shared was Beethoven. In fact, everything I'll be playing today is Beethoven. It was his Bagatelle Opus 126, number 1. These 6 Bagatelles, Opus 126, are the last thing he ever wrote for the piano. More on that later. And it's been really interesting to me. Like just about every musician I know, music's meant more, even more to me these last 9 months since we've been living under these extraordinary circumstances in the time of COVID. And it's been fascinating to me to see what music I have and haven't especially gravitated towards. And even though Beethoven's been kind of at the center of my life for so long, spent 10 years recording his sonatas, I didn't especially expect that I would be drawn to him right now, because his music is so intense and so much. And, you know, given that we're living in this time that is already so intense and so much, I don't know that I really thought that Beethoven would be what I wanted or needed. I might have gravitated more towards some kind of musical comfort food. But I was just thinking about something that happened to me right as COVID hit. I think it was like March 14th, and I had just a couple days earlier come back home in a mad rush in the middle of a tour. And I all of a sudden had all this time in my hands. I thought, what am I going to do with myself? And I, like I'm sure so many of you said, I'm going to read more. I'm going to read more books. And I went to my bookshelf and at random picked out, I'm not making this up, How to Be Alone. And whatever higher power you believe in, I really think he or she was being just a little on the nose in that moment. But I was reminded of this story today just because it strikes me that the reason that I'm so drawn to Beethoven right now is that he provides this incredible guide to being alone. He was alone for most of his life for various reasons, circumstances, and to do with his personality as well. But most of all, in the latter part of his life, he was functionally deaf, which I think is maybe the most profound form of isolation a person can experience. And in writing this extraordinary music that he did, really, extraordinary is an overused word, but God, extraordinary music. He kind of not just showed us how to be alone, but also reminded us that there is a incredible power and possibility in aloneness, in isolation. I don't think he wrote these pieces in spite of being deaf. I think maybe in a sense because of it, he was able to retreat into this remarkable imagination of his and produce works which saw beyond what the eye can see, heard beyond what the ear can hear. Such a gift to our lives. And so all the pieces I'm going to play today are from late enough in his life that he was not hearing anymore. And the next thing I'm going to play is a piece I adore. It's the first movement of the Sonata Opus 90. And it's interesting to me, there's this middle period where he wrote these barn burners, the Waldstein and the Appassionata. And then, of course, late in life he wrote, the music that kind of changed the world, the Hammerklavier and the last 3 miraculous sonatas. But in between there's a relatively fallow period where he wasn't writing as much, and this Opus 90 comes from that time. And I find these works so moving because alongside the power and intensity, which is just always there with Beethoven, there you hear flashes of a real vulnerability, which he didn't always let bubble to the surface. And when he does, oh my God, it's just so so unbelievably affecting. And this is one of those pieces where you hear those moments where suddenly you realize how fragile he is, in addition to being strong. I just adore it. So again, this is, it's a two-movement sonata. This is the first movement of the E minor sonata, opus 90. I find it almost physically painful not to go on to the second movement, which is not just beautiful, but so touching in the wake of that. Suddenly there's such an optimism and warmth in it. But this is a tiny desk concert, so next time. But now I'll move on to the next thing that I want to play for you. I think inevitably this concert, with its theme of isolation, has to have something from those last three sonatas, which I think are the most magnificent document of interiority, if that's the right word, ever written. Even though they address the kind of the biggest life questions, they come from so deep inside, and they seem to be the product of someone living with himself in such a profound and intense way. And again, appropriate for a tiny desk concert. I'm playing the first two movements of Opus 109, which are, again, even though they kind of conjure the infinite, never has infinity been so economical. These two movements together are 6 minutes long, and the amount of material and ideas and ground that they managed to cover in so little time is just frankly miraculous. And this is the first of the late sonatas that I ever heard, the first of them that I ever studied, the first that I played, the first that I loved. I was 16 when I played it the first time. I'm sure I didn't have a clue about the piece. I'm not entirely sure that I have a clue now, but I have been living with it for many, many years now, and still love it just as, maybe even more dearly. At any rate, there's nothing I can say about it that will be even remotely equal, or that won't diminish what it is. So I'm going to move straight to it. No more blather. This is the first two movements of Beethoven's Opus 109. the desire to go on to the next movement is again almost overwhelming, especially since that ends in such a terrible way, and then the whole world kind of opens up into the variations of the last movement. But alas, tiny concert, tiny desk, tiny concert. And in fact, the next thing I'm going to play for you is going to be the last piece on this concert. I will go back to the Opus 126 bagatelles that I began with. Again, last thing Beethoven ever wrote for the piano, and I find that there's something about Beethoven's goodbyes that is just so incredibly moving. He wrote these 32 sonatas, which are, to my mind, the biggest and grandest and most ambitious and greatest, really, body of music ever written. And they end in Opus 111, not in a way that's monumental or even in any way certain, but just with a kind of, not an end, but an absence of a continuation. You know, you have a heartbeat that you hear 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 times, and then the 5th one never comes. It's a kind of a musical death, if you will. And similarly, you know, having written more music for the piano than he did for any other instrument, having done more for the instrument, having completely transformed its possibilities, the last thing he wrote for the instrument was not a big ambitious statement of any kind, but these 6 bagatelles, trifles, each of which makes its incredibly beautiful and moving point and then evanesces. And the one that I'm going to play for you now is, in a sense, the most evanescent. It sort of ends sort of by just disappearing into the air in the most just wonderful and strange and powerful way. And because it's so wonderful and powerful and strange, I want to leave you with that. So I'm going to say now my thank you to all of you for listening. And again, I want to just wish you well. And I hope very much that somehow I can be with you in person soon. You know, I miss it terribly, as I'm sure all of you do. And I wish you all well. I wish you good health and as much sanity as is feasible in these crazy times we're living in. And with that, for NPR's Tiny Desk, I'm Jonathan Yeble.